As always, this is Fails and Fixins. I am your host, Dave Plough, and I am here today to talk about pulling a Ratner. Now, I'm not surprised if not a lot of you know what pulling a Ratner is. It is something I didn't even know about until I started researching the various things we could do for this podcast. To pull a Ratner is, to boil it down, is to destroy everything you've built up in about a 30-minute speech. So if you have a fear of public speaking, if that's something you're scared of, this episode might not be the one for you. But I urge you to listen anyway, because there's probably some takeaways that you could get that might help you in future engagements where you have no choice but to speak. So before we get going, let's go ahead and talk about the Ratner Group, what it was, and who's involved here. The year's 1949, and Leslie Ratner opens a jewelry shop in Richmond, Surrey, England, which then expands into jewelry manufacturing. I know nothing about the UK or its geography, so I don't know where this Richmond, Surrey is, or if I'm even saying it right. But that's where the Ratner Group began. And it was a typical jewelry store. It was the type of place that you would go to buy earrings or necklaces, things like that. But it's not the type of jewelry store that you think of, or that most people would think of today anyway. So for a number of years, this group was just growing from 1949 until about 1965, when a guy named Gerald Ratner, who was a son, jumped into the company. He left school, left high school or whatever they call it over there, and he started working in the family-owned jewelry company. And that was in 1965. So he worked there for about 20 years before he actually took over the company. In 1984, at the age of 34, so a pretty young dude, takes over the family company. And then from 1984 through 1990, Ratner Group expanded from around 150 stores to over 2,000 stores. That's right, 2,000. That's a lot. So not only is that a lot, it's about 50% of the UK jewelry market. That wasn't all he owned, though. It wasn't just the UK jewelry market. Ratner was everywhere. In fact, you might have known them here in the US under the names K Jewelers or Zales, places that were in your mall. And this is what Ratner Group became. And when we're talking about K Jewelers and Zales, sorry to go off on a rant here, but I remember those two stores in my local mall. They were across the hall from each other, as in they both owned a corner section as you were walking back to JCPenney or Elder Beerman. And I always used to imagine that they would have turf wars, like they would throw jewelry at each other and fight. I don't know. I always thought there would be some kind of rivalry there. Knowing that they were owned by the same parent company, kind of makes things make a little more sense to me. Now, Ratner got the group to make this jewelry store all over the place, put them in malls and do things like this. He got the idea from Pennicote Lane Market. He was walking through there one day and he noticed that the vendors selling the best goods weren't always making the most sales. He found that the vendors who were yelling the loudest or who had the best displays, those were the people who made the most sales. They were the ones making the most money. So he took that concept, what he saw there at the Pennicote Lane Market, and he brought it into his jewelry store. And he mentions this in his speech. At that time, jewelry stores, Ratner Group included, they did a lot of closed doors. If you walked in to buy something, they would shut the door behind you and they would lock it. Not only did they lock it, but there was a good chance they were going to bolt the door closed. So you would be the only customer in the store as they're pulling out the jewelry. And the average cost of jewelry at the time was somewhere around 300 pounds. Keep in mind, we're talking about British money from 1960s to about, the European Union when they switched to the euro. So we're talking pounds and pence. So anyway, 300 pounds for a necklace or some jewelry that you needed. And he decided to flip all of this on the head. He thought it would be the best for the business. And apparently it was. He made sure all of his stores had these bright orange and red displays. When you walked up to a store, you could see how much the things in the store cost. You would see whatever deals they had, if they had a BOGO deal or if they had 50% off, something like that. And Ratner Group's stores became the place, and this was their whole MO. This was their marketing. They were the place where working class boys bought rings for working class girls. It's a pretty nice sentiment, right? That way, you're catering to a blue collar market, and they know that you're catering to them. They're like, okay, this is my jewelry store. They weren't the best looking stores. I've seen some photos, and you can look them up. Not the best looking store. They were pretty gaudy. The signs were all over the place. I mean, it really is. When I think of going back to those stores that we know, the K and the Zales, they're somewhat nice. They have some signage in them, but it's not overdone. This place was overblown. You couldn't walk past a Ratner store without there being a giant billboard in front of it. So that's what Ratner Group became. So in 1990, I've got to tell you, the stock market had a bit of recession. Not a big one like we had in the early mid-2000s, but a small dip in the market, enough that businesses were feeling it. But it didn't seem to affect Ratner Group. They had a high stock price, they were doing good business, and people were impressed with Gerald Ratner. And I'll just give you a look at, this is what Gerald looks like today. I couldn't get a good photo of him. So there's Gerald. People were impressed with him. He was a good speaker. He was well-spoken. He was able to handle himself, and he kept his stores from going into this mild recession. With that in mind, he was invited to be a keynote speaker at the annual Institute of Directors convention in April 23rd of 1991. This is a yearly thing. They invite over 6,000 business pros, like businessmen, company owners, things like this, CEOs, and journalists. And they all come. And Gerald was the keynote speaker. And he was speaking around lunchtime. Now, I wasn't able to confirm if this was one of those pre-lunch speeches or just coming back from lunch speeches, or if the person that put this thing together wanted to put everyone through hell and made it a during lunch speech. I wasn't able to figure all that out. But I do know it was around lunchtime, and Ratner felt that he had to get these people to pay attention to him. If you've ever been to a giant presentation, had a lunchtime keynote, sometimes your mind starts to wander. You're thinking about lunch, or you've just had lunch and you're a little bit sleepy, or once again, you're in hell and you're eating lunch while the keynote speaker is speaking, which is hell for the keynote speaker too. The poor guy's got to deal with you eating and having table talk. So over 6,000 people in this room, he's speaking, and he decides he has to grab the attention. And his speech has already been handed out to the journalists, so they've already got a copy of what he's about to read. But he kind of goes off script a little bit. In fact, he talks about some of the company products. And one of them, and I'm just going to read you the whole quote here. One of the pieces of company jewelry that he speaks about, he said, "We also do cut glass sherry decanters, complete with 6 glasses on a silver-plated tray that your butler can serve you drinks on, all for $4.95. That would be €4.95, I believe. People say, how can you sell this for such a low price? And I say, because it's total crap." Crowd laughs, right? Crowd laughs. People in the audience think it's funny. He feels good about this joke he's just made because he knows he's got them. So he keeps going. In reference to an imitation book that they used to sell as a piece of decor. It's this book. I'm going to go ahead and explain to you what it is. It's a book. It's a fake book. It doesn't open. And it's got these fake pages that are kind of curved up, and it's got little pieces of decorative dust on it, is how he describes it. In reference to this, he goes, "I know it's not in the best possible taste, but we sold over 250,000 of them last year." So he's called it one thing a piece of total crap. He said another thing is in poor taste, which kind of agree. A decorative book, not in the best taste. But he's not done yet. He goes on to talk about some gold earrings, which he said, "We even sell a pair of earrings for under £1. Gold earrings as well. And some people say that's cheaper than a prawn sandwich from Marks and Spencer's. But I have to say, the sandwich will probably last longer than the earrings." Huge uproarious laughter right there. Like, people really liked it. They thought it was funny, but they also start murmuring a little bit. And I got to tell you, all 3 of these quotes where he just totally disses his company product were said in under the first 6.5 minutes of a half-hour speech. So he got the audience's attention. Keep in mind, business pros and reporters. The day of the speech, Tuesday, April 23rd, 1991, their stock price was just over 63 pounds per share. Friday, April 26th, stock price was up to 65. Keep in mind, this is 1990. News doesn't hit right away like it does now. There's no Twitter. Everything's done through newspapers and magazines, trade magazines, quite a bit. So Friday closed at 65. Following Monday, it's down to closes down at 61 pounds. You know, a little bit of a drop, not that bad, considering they were up to over 70 about 2 weeks before the speech, and they were just kind of fluctuating in that 60 to 70 range. It's acceptable. The close Monday, 61. Monday, April 29th, 61 pounds for stock. By May 2nd was the last time that was worth 60. From that point, the stock was in a near constant free fall. So about a week. It took about a week for all the news to get out and for the Ratner Group stock to start sinking. Actually, within that week, Ratner Group started its first ever non-holiday celeb marketing campaign. So they knew something had gone wrong. The news had leaked about this speech that he had given. The quotes were out, and they were worried. And they started a celebrity campaign. The campaign cost somewhere between $250,000 and £500,000. And by the end of 1991, that stock, that the day of the speech was worth 63 pounds, well, now it was down to 11 pounds, 25 pence. By the end of 1992, the stock was only worth $4.17 per share. It didn't even hit $20 again until 1999. So it didn't even get up to 60 until I don't know when. I stopped looking there. The company value had dropped 424 million pounds nearly overnight. So by the time they started that celebrity campaign, it was too late. The stocks were in a free fall, and Gerald Ratner was forced to step down as chairman, moved into the less high profile CEO position. I guess less profile. It's still a CEO spot, right? Well, within 18 months, by the end of 1992, the guy was out of the group completely. So his family company, he's kicked out of because of these three remarks. And I got to say, the speech is not bad. It's about a half hour. It's on YouTube, and I believe we also posted it on the Fails and Fixins Facebook page. So if you're on here, just go ahead, hop on our Facebook page and check it out. It's worth at least the first 6.5 minutes so you can see these quotes happen. Things were so bad. Not only did they kick Ratner out of the group, but they changed their company name to Singette Group in 1993. That's a pretty bad deal. They had 50% of the British market going into 1991, and by 93, things had gotten so bad, they had to completely change their name, kick out the family guy, and start all over again. How do you improve on this? What do you do? This is Fails and Fixins. How do you fix this? In 1991, I'm not sure you can fix this. Things are different then. News moves slower. There's no way to get out really in front of it. You don't know what the backlash is going to be until it's happened. And by the time it's happened in 1991, damage is done. Ratner in the room reads like he's done something okay, like he's gotten it down. The public, and not only the public, but shareholders who were already nervous because of a recession that's happening at that time, they're the ones that let him know. And that's not instant. You don't get the instant feedback that you do today that way. But our job here is to fix these things. So what would we do? How do we communicate in this crisis? How do we work on the crisis communications? Well, there's two routes that I saw here. One of them is Ratner sticks around and you publicly acknowledge what's happening. You have him come out and say, hey guys, I made some poor jokes. He says this. He explains the situation. He explains the room. He says everything I said earlier about I was giving a keynote speech and I knew that everyone in this room had their mind somewhere else. So I was trying to pull them back in by making a few jokes, and they were in poor taste and they were at the expense of our product, which I hold our product to the highest standards. I would never do blah, 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 blah. And you make it the company's MO. You use this to create your new marketing campaign. The new campaign is we give you the best jewelry at the best possible price. Now, you don't say it just like that. That's too long. It's not as good as working class boys, working class girls. However, you communicate that as your company message. That becomes your entire MO. And you have Ratner deliver all of this directly to the people, directly to the shareholders, directly to the trade mags. Anywhere it needs to be said, you have him say it. You do not let a newspaper go by without publishing Ratner apologizing and explaining that their company policy is to make sure everyone can have the best possible jewelry. That's one way. That's the way he probably wanted to go. That's the way he wanted to stay with the company. He wanted to continue the family tradition. However, the way that would have been best served for the company would have been probably for him to publicly step down immediately. This is a guy who had just demonstrated poor decision-making, poor leadership. He probably needs to hold a press conference and say, I've done a terrible job and I've hurt the family name. As such, I am going to step out of the company and allow so-and-so to take over. This probably does some real damage control right away. People take a look at that and they say, oh, he knows he screwed up and this company is going to make amends. At that point, someone else gets to take over and can change a lot of things. And you probably hire Gerald back as an advisor or something else just to keep the company name going. You don't have to change the name 2 years later if you do this. Those are my two suggestions. And honestly, they're the only two ways that I see out of the mess that he created at the time in which he created it. Today, there are 100 things you could do. You could go online. You could make apologies. You could make more jokes with a wink and a nod, maybe. If people could see the actual speech instead of read the quotes back then, it's not as bad. Once again, the room reads well until the final one. The final one, people kind of murmur, but then they die down. And he gives a very good speech, a very good business speech. So that's my fix. What do you guys have? Why don't you let us know in the comments section? Go ahead and say what you would have done or what you thought of Ratner's speech, how you would have fixed the company, how you would have saved the company. Tell us in the comments section on our Facebook page, or you can email me at dave@failsandfixins.com. Send me an email. I'll take a look at it. We'll post it somewhere. We'll talk about it. We're going to do an episode one of these days where I just handle everything you guys send me and say, hey, you guys have some great ideas. Let's try some of this. So that is it for this week's episode. I will be back next week when I have another fail and another fix.